deliver the first lecture. May I request Dr. J.L. Raina, Chairman ISOL Foundation, to welcome Professor Pruzan.
I'm Dr. Peter. I think I recollect now that having met you, but a long time back, so therefore maybe we have not been able to interact. But I must thank you for having agreed to deliver this online lecture for Dr. S.K. Memorial Lecture. In fact, Dr. S.K. Memorial, S.K. Chakraborty was our patron, first patron who has initiated this, and Sunita has been carrying on ISL activities since then. She will give a brief rundown on that. But we have really very, very good memories of his involvement into this segment, which normally people avoid in organizations because they want to be clean and neat and clean. I think your lecture today can really revive the spirit which we are wanting organizations to adopt. It is not religious spirituality, it is moralistic spirituality which we are really fond of introducing, and with your lecture today, probably it will get a boost. Thank you once again for having agreed to this lecture, and all credit goes to Sunita for having coordinated with you on this. Thanks and welcome.
Thank you, sir. Now, may I request Professor Nishiganta Bhuvan, Coordinator Management Center for Human Values, to say a few words. Professor Bhuvan, please.
First of all, thank you very much for organizing this talk. And I'm very grateful that you invited me to participate in this. I'm very grateful to Dr. Peter Pruzan for agreeing to deliver this lecture. Professor S.K. Chakraborty founded the Management Center for Human Values at IIM Calcutta. That was consecrated to the Vedantic ethics from Indian deep structure in 1995, November 23, 1995. So that was a time, when ethics was not part of management curriculum. And he had the vision of incorporating not just ethics, but the values of the Vedantic ethics, which emerged from the Indian psychic. And so he played a leading role in the field. And much later, I think Sumantra Ghoshal in 2005 only talked about how management is actually taught in a different manner without values, how Adam Smith is adopted just with his Wealth of Nations and not the theory of moral sentiments. So grateful to be here, and thanks for organizing this, Professor Sunita, and thanks Dr. Pruzan to be delivering this lecture.
Pleasure.
I quickly make you walk through the trajectory of ISOL Foundation, and before I request Professor Peter Pruzan to start his first S.K. Chakraborty Memorial Lecture. It is organized in the memory of late Professor S.K. Chakraborty, founding chairman of Integrating Spirituality and Organizational Leadership Foundation. He was founding chairman from September 5, 2009 till September 30, 2018. ISOL Foundation aims to promote leadership that nurtures the spirit of each person in order to create harmony at workplace and society. The foundation envisages promoting compassion, love, and truth at workplace in order to create non-violent, non-exploitative, and sustainable organizations. The foundation is committed through its various activities to bring together different perspectives, disciplines, and wisdom from various spiritual traditions to integrate spirituality and organizational leadership in order to create positive energy and enlightened corporate citizenship behavior at workplace. Our inspiration is Trinity. It draws inspiration from Sri Ramakrishna, who talked about as many views, so many paths. Swami Vivekananda ISOL sources its inspiration from Swami Vivekananda, who was one of the first Indians to promote Indian spiritual values to the industrial world. It draws insight from the life of Ma Sharda on women leadership. This is the registered logo of ISOL Foundation, and the motto is Serve Humanity for Prosperity. The initiative started with an aim to emerge as a research-based management education center for integrating spirituality and organizational leadership. This is the link of the website. So we hold regular international conferences on integrating spirituality and organizational leadership. We do case development, engage in rigorous research to identify the benefits of integrating spirituality and organizational leadership, to promote research in this area, both nationally and internationally. We offer value-based management education and theme-based experiential workshops for the corporate executives and leaders. ISOL Foundation, the cause is to merge the ecology of soul with the ecology of organization, and through integrating perspectives and wisdom from various spiritual traditions to promote compassion, love, and truth in order to create non-violent, non-exploitative, and sustainable organizations. These are the different activities of the foundation. These are at ISOL publication. We regularly publish these 2 biannual international journals, and in 2015, we released these volumes on integrating spirituality and organizational leadership. Integrating spirituality and organizational leadership came into being in 2009. In 2010, ISOL Research Foundation was created. Through ISOL Research Foundation, we bring out international journal on Vedic foundation of management. ISOL Research Foundation have 3 centers: Center for Integral Healing, Center for Consciousness Studies, and it also have Vedic Foundation of Indian Management. Academy of Value-Based Management was operational in India since 2012. In 2019, on March 3, it was registered in Toronto, Canada as a separate entity. In 2019, we came up as Center for Social Innovation and Entrepreneurship, which is the social activity wing of ISOL Foundation. It's philanthropy of ISOL Foundation. ISOL Global Foundation was registered in 2015 in USA, and we have presence in USA, Canada, and Mongolia. This is in brief the timeline of ISOL Foundation. With these few words, I welcome Professor Peter Pruzan to deliver the first S.K. Chakraborty Memorial Lecture. I'll quickly talk about the background of Professor Pruzan. Professor Pruzan is Professor Emeritus at Copenhagen Business School. His education has been Harvard, Case Western Reserve University of Copenhagen, former business leader and professor, Technical University of Denmark, University of Copenhagen, CBS. He authored 18 books and 150 articles. Among latest work, research methodology, the aims, practices, and ethics of science, on the experience of beauty in nature, in mathematics and science, and in spirituality, science and spirituality. With these few words, it's our honor and blessing to welcome you, Professor Pruzan, being a close associate of Professor S.K. Chakraborty. We could not think anybody other than you to deliver the first S.K. Chakraborty Memorial Lecture. Please, thank you.
What do I do now?
You can start your presentation, sir.
I will do that. Thank you. Are you able to hear me? Hello.
Yes, yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Wonderful. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to provide this memorial lecture. I think it is a fine coincidence that this is taking place on a very special day in India. As I recall, this is Teachers' Day in India. And Professor Chakraborty was a wonderful teacher. So thank you for inviting me. It's an honor. Before I actually get into the more academic parts of my talk, I would like to share some views, some reflections on Shitangshu Chakraborty. I met him for the first time in 1996. My wife, Kirsten, and I at that time were spending roughly half a year in India. I was lecturing at different universities and spending a lot of time at the ashram of Satya Sai Baba in Andhra Pradesh. At one point, I was holding a talk at the Hindu University of Benares. At that time, a teacher who was one of the people attending my talk came up to me and said, "You must get in contact with Professor Chakraborty." It was difficult at that time, internet, emails not functioning, but it succeeded. I contacted him one day on phone. He immediately invited me and my wife to visit him at the IIM in Kolkata. This was the start of 15 years of teamwork. During that period of time, I visited the IIM in Calcutta a number of times as a guest lecturer, as a visiting professor. Professor Chakraborty and his wife visited us here in Copenhagen. He held guest lectures at the Copenhagen Business School, and we visited him and his wife in their home in Kolkata. It was a wonderful and inspiring teamwork, but not always easy. One of the characteristics that he had was a very strong sense of his own worth and very strong-willed person. So it made it at times difficult to come with critical assessments of his work. He realized this, and at times he would refer to me as his older brother and telling me that he was accepting what I was saying simply because I was his older brother. I'd like now to read aloud something that I said at the last ISOL meeting that I attended in 2011 in Haridwar, where Professor Chakraborty and I were keynote speakers. What I'm going to read aloud now were the notes that I wrote to myself to introduce my talk at that time. I said then, many thanks to Professor Sunita Singh Sengupta. She is a humble and powerful woman. I have attended all the 3 conferences that ISOL was holding, Delhi, Pondicherry, and Haridwar, and 2 workshops. Sunita Singh Sengupta provided positive and loving leadership and inspiration that has made these remarkable events possible. When I try to think of her, I have a suitable, a reasonable metaphor. She's an Indian goddess with 5 heads and 5 pair of hands. For so many heads and so many hands would be required for a human being to achieve as much as she does. I then continued to thank Professor Chakraborty, who would make the presentation following mine after a tea break. I thanked Professor Chakraborty, Professor Emeritus, the former head of the Management Center for Human Values at the Indian Institute of Management in Calcutta, and the convener of the Journal of Human Values. Professor Chakraborty has been the most respected and admired spokesperson in India for the theme of this conference. That was the conference in 2011. For more years than many of those of you who are attending have been alive, he has promoted a values-based and spiritual framework for comprehending and evaluating individual and organizational activity. I have had the privilege of working with him from time to time since we first met in Calcutta more than 15 years ago. I had delivered a lecture at the Hindu University of Benares when one of the teachers who was attending shouted to me, "He's a saint, you must visit him." Although Professor Chakraborty is of limited physical stature, as those of you who have had the privilege of listening to or reading his words of wisdom know, he is in fact a giant, to be revered for his significant contributions to the field of spirituality and organizational leadership. On behalf of all of those who've been enriched by your contributions, Professor Chakraborty, I express my heartfelt thanks and respects. Well, those were words I had written and spoken at this wonderful meeting of ISOL Foundation in Haridwar in February 2011. And now I'll progress to my talk today. It's interesting that the talk I've developed is to a great extent based upon conversations that Professor Chakraborty and I had. In the late 1980s, I had developed a concept in Denmark called ethical accounting. It became very famous in my part of the world and was used by a large number of important institutions, governmental, bankings, hospitals, schools, businesses. The fundamental idea of ethical accounting was that for a decision to be ethical, it must be approved by those parties who are affected by it. So ethical accounting was actually a methodology for developing the values that the various stakeholders of a company shared with the company. Our discussions on that theme led then to the topics which I will present to you today. Let me warm up by asking certain questions. Excuse me, I'm going to change, I'm going to do. One of the first questions we considered was, what is a company? What is an organization? We have a tendency to speak of Tata organization's values. What is a company? What do we really mean? Is it an artifact? Is it a technology? Is it a logo? Is it products and patents? Is it a money machine, as it is considered in many parts of the world? Is it a local society of human beings? Is it a collection of stakeholders, of owners, of leaders, of workers, employees, of citizens, of you name it, depending upon the organization? Is it to be considered a citizen in the society, and as a citizen with certain rights, privileges, and responsibilities? And then comes the question, can a company have values, visions, and virtues? It's so often to hear people talking of the values of IBM, the values of Tata. What does it mean? When can we say meaningfully that a company has values? Are they the values of its leadership? If so, when the leadership changes, does the company's values change? These are all very important organizational existential questions that are rarely treated in the literature and at business schools. I'm going to continue these thoughts, where I call warming up, by looking at what happens in a country where the monetary success of an organization plays such a dominating role that in general the concepts of values or even of stakeholders is very hard to find. The following are some frightening statistics about that country, about the United States. By the way, I was born and raised in the United States, was born in New York City in 1936. I'm 87 years of age now. And I moved to Denmark in my 20s on a research grant, and it has become my home ever since. Denmark is a small country, highly value-oriented, in contrast to the United States, and that's what I'm going to demonstrate here. There's been a tremendous growth in the inequity, in the difference in the wealth of people in the United States. The richer are getting richer and richer, and the poor are actually getting poorer and poorer. The top 1% of earners in the United States in 2021, they owned a larger share of wealth than all of the middle class of the United States. So the 1% owned more than the middle class, total middle class of the United States. The average CEO earned almost 28 million US dollars, roughly 400 times more than a typical worker in an American company. 38 million Americans lived in poverty, more than 10% of the population. This is substantially higher than any other developed country. At the same time, the United States had the highest prison population. Over 2 million adults were in prison, and the highest incarceration rate, that is the highest percentage of the population in prison of any country of the world. Each year now, every country in the world is evaluated by referring to its citizens and getting a measure of how satisfied or how happy they are. In 2022, the United States, with all its wealth, was number 19. Denmark, a far poorer country, was number 2. Again, this is very much related to the concept of values, because what makes people happy is not money, but the values that they share with their loved ones and with the communities that they live in. The United States is certainly not a safe place to live. It was ranked 129. My small country was ranked number 4 in the world. I think I'll go back. I'm going to raise a question. What do you think is the most common cause of death for young Americans, people from the time they're born, from one age of 1 year until until they filled 17 years of age? Do you think it's sickness? Do you think it's automobile accidents? What do you think it is? Well, the sad answer is it is shooting. The most frequent cause of death, of childhood death in the United States, is shooting. And suicide rates per 100,000 in the United States were roughly double what they are in my lovely small country. Now, today we're speaking about a number of concepts. I already touched on one of them. What do we mean by a company? What do we mean by values? What do we mean by leadership? I'll be touching on all of these. It's interesting that the IIMs, I have lectured in just about almost every IIM in India. It's interesting, they're all called management. Indian Institutes of Management. I think that if I were to rename them, I would call them Indian Institutes of Leadership. Because leadership is far more than, in my view, than management, which is ordinarily to consist of words like control, coordination, and planning. I use the word values, visions, and virtues to characterize leadership, and to keep the V's going, I'll say wisdom. Values, vision, virtues, and wisdom. These are characteristics of a leadership. A leader that participates in leadership must not only be anchored in values, his own and those of the stakeholders, but in his visions, his virtues, his or her virtues, visions, and, to use a term commonly associated with spirituality, the wisdom. You can lead an organization and you can lead others. But to do so, really, you must be able to lead yourself. I underscore this because one often gets the impression that so many of the leaders are not really leading themselves. They're being led by a pressure to be so-called successful, meaning to earn lots of money, to be number one, to be powerful. They are not leading themselves. In order to lead others, in order to lead an organization, they require the values, the visions, the virtues, the wisdom, and the ethics. All of this leads as to demands as to values. That's the next concept we're going to look at. What do we mean by values? Values can be said to be terminal goals, not just the means to serve other goals. Let me try and explain with an example. You might hear a leader, a manager in a major company talking about how important it is for them to have good, satisfied employees. The difference between that as a real value and as a means is the excuse me? Are you trying to say something to me?
No, no, no.
Oh, okay, I just heard some voices. If a company is, the leadership of a company is stressing how important it is for them to have competent, happy workers, that could be a value for the company if they really mean it. If it is important to the company, not just in order for it to earn money, but because it's important for the very fact that that company exists, that it should be a haven, it should be a place where the people who work there find fulfillment in their lives, then it would be a value. Then having satisfied, competent, happy workers would be a value and not just a means to serving other goals. In order to develop values, organizations have to develop what I call existential wonder. This requires considering questions like, what is a good life for me? What is a good life for others in our organization? What is a good life for others, for our stakeholders, for the world around us? I noticed that when Sunita was presenting these wonderful slides telling the history of ISOL and what it stands for, the notion of service was paramount. That is what I'm talking about. Under this kind of existential wonder that I'm referring to, there are also questions of identity. For the individual, who am I really? And for the organization, who are we? Who are we? We must ask questions as to our purpose. Why am I here? And for the organization, why are we here? Why is our company here? Why is our organization here? Why is our hospital here? Why is our business here? Why? And responsibility. In order to be able to speak of responsibility, I'm not just thinking of the American responsibility that you have to live up to the shareholders and maximize their wealth. I'm thinking of personal responsibility. How well do I live up to my values? And for the company, how well do we live up to our values? What then are shared values? Shared values are the criteria used by an organization and its stakeholders to reflect on identity, legitimacy, and success. So why again are values so important in leadership? Well, if we really are not grounded in our values, we really would lack the basis for observing, for describing, measuring, and evaluating how well, who we are, what is our corporate identity, for observing, describing, measuring, and evaluating our behavior, and success. Success here, in other words, is a far greater, more inclusive term than just wealth. I'm happy with this quote. I'll tell you why in a moment. Practically speaking, this is a quote from a report from a Danish company. A report on his values. This report is all about values and how we put them into action. When making decisions, we have to constantly ask ourselves, is this the right thing to do? Without values, you can never know what is right or what is wrong. That statement is made by the former CEO of a Danish company, also active in India, called Novo Nordisk. It's one of the world's major suppliers of medicine, particularly for, what is the word in English? Diabetes. I'm very happy to present this quote because for a number of years, I was a sparring partner. I would have regular conversations with the CEO of the company and with other members of its leadership. Today, like myself, the CEO is former CEO, but the company is still going on. It is still maintaining the same values. And Novo Nordisk has this year become something unbelievable for such a small country as Denmark. It has become the most valuable company in all of Europe. No other company in Europe has an assessed numerical monetary value as large as this values-based company. Let me continue to reflect upon why we should have values, why values are necessary in leadership. First of all, power is becoming powerless in democratic societies with flat organizations. What do I mean by this? Like a country like Denmark, and one of the reasons, by the way, why that company Novo Nordisk has become so successful also in the traditional monetary sense, is that it's become a very flat organization. By this I mean that there's few levels of hierarchy. Any person, any employee in that company, the door is open to the CEO, not just in theory, but in practice. This is less the case, my observations in India. India has had a far greater tradition for hierarchical power, but is still moving in this direction. When our organizations become larger and larger, its top leaders lose contact with reality. I mean, the way it is today, most top leaders in major organizations know very little about what is really going on. They have a number of advisors, quite often highly paid consultants. They receive key figures on a number of factors, but how the employee in the production line feels, or what he aspires to, how the people who market the goods, how the consumers really feel. Leaders know very little about this. The larger the company is, the more hierarchical it is, the more international it is, the less real contact our top leaders have with reality. And as I say, the language of money is too poor. One can measure, if you look at my slides, on the slides I presented for you earlier, on the role that money is playing. You have an extremely wealthy nation like the United States with all kinds of problems. So just evaluating a company or an organization, whatever, by its wealth or its ability to generate wealth is much too poor a measure. In order today to attract and hold creative, productive, motivated, and loyal employees, today, more than ever before, earlier, talented, creative, productive employees are able to switch jobs. When I grew up, it was quite common to read about companies in the United States or elsewhere where employees would celebrate 25, 30, 40, even 50 years of employment. Today, that's a rare phenomenon. People change jobs, they change where they live, they change, and unfortunately, in many cases, they even change partners. Divorce rates are so much higher than they have ever been. In order for us to attract and hold, to keep, to maintain people who are important for a company, we must motivate them. And one of the most significant ways of motivating them is to have us share values, what is important. Which leads to the next one, which is to develop corporate identity. Who are we really? Who are we? What do we stand for? And unless we know that, we will not be able to have a true value for assessing and developing corporate social responsibility. And finally, to be a bit cynical, it also pays. As I showed with a slide where I referred to this highly successful Danish company, Novo Nordisk, value orientation can in fact lead to highly successful monetary results. Excuse me. But if a company is to base its values on to base its leadership on values, leaders cannot just perform as they have for so long a time. It is not only a question of leading, it's also a question of serving. Again, referring to Sunita Sengupta's presentation earlier, the whole concept of service is primary here. I'm all of a sudden recall the development of a concept in the United States, which led to considerable discussion, the concept of servant leadership. I don't have time to go into that, but you might look it up. In order for leaders to serve, and to serve really, they must be sensitive, they must have empathy, they must open their hearts. These are not things that you learn at business school. I hope what I'm saying is correct. I retired a number of years ago, so what the teaching is, today I am not in contact with. But certainly for all the years that I was a professor, and for all the years that I was guiding corporations throughout the world as a consultant, concepts of empathy or sensitivity were not primary. But they are primary. They are fundamental if you are going to have leaders that serve their organizations. In order to inspire, engage, and facilitate, values are necessary. I think I'll interrupt myself here and all of a sudden recall a very frightening experience I had a number of years ago. I saw a video I can't remember the year. It was roughly, it was a number, it was a video.
ஒரு ஷால் கிடைச்சிருக்கு சரி அதை போட்டு வா
Excuse me, are you trying to say something to me?
No, no, no. Someone logged in and he was not mute. Go ahead, Prof.
Thank you. And you're able to see my slides, right? You are able to see my slides.
No, no, no. Your slide
No,
was
sir, no, sir.
never visible.
My slides are not visible.
No,
No,
it's
sir.
not visible, sir.
My goodness. I went through this yesterday with Rohit, and my goodness.
Yes, share screen. I think you have not done it.
I did. I wrote on shared screen. I'll go. Let me leave this. How do I leave this now? 1 second.
Do you want me to share your slide? I can do.
Yes, do that.
I'll do.
Are you able to see them now?
Yes, sir.
You can see them. I am terribly sorry. Then you
No,
were not able.
You
were
tell
not
me
able.
which slide to go.
You were not able to see all of these slides. I'll run through them quickly so you can see what I had been talking about.
Yeah. I think you were here.
I'll stop when I get to where I am now.
Yes. Yes, you were here. You were here, Professor. Should I move the slide further?
You're able to follow my.
Yes.
Now this is where I stopped.
Yes, sir.
Stopped with the concept of dialogue. I said,
Yes. Yeah.
and these, of course, are great challenges when organizations become larger and larger. And another challenge is one of integrity. And this is where I was about to tell a frightening story. I remember some years ago. Do you remember there was an organization called Enron? Enron.
Yes.
It was one of the world's largest companies at the time. It completely went bankrupt. A week before it was disclosed that they had participated in criminal behavior, I saw either he was the CEO or one of the very top leaders in that company holding a talk. The talk was for new employees of the company. And he was telling them how proud they could be to work for such a company that had these fantastic values. And of course, it turned out that all of that was false. So this concept of integrity is vital, that leaders today are people that other people look up to because they express their thoughts, words, and via their deeds in such a way that people realize that they are trying to serve others. And this, of course, leads directly to the concept of spirituality. The concept of service and spirituality are closely related. I mentioned earlier, much earlier when I was talking about how I had met Professor Chakraborty. By the way, are you seeing the slide now? Sunita,
Yes,
are you
sir.
seeing?
Yes,
Yes, Prof.
Yeah, it's visible. Go ahead, Prof.
When I mentioned how the time when I met Professor Chakraborty in 1996, that at that time, my wife and I were spending roughly half a year in India. And much of that time was spent at the ashram of Satya Sai Baba. As some of you might be familiar with who Sai Baba was, he is most famous for one of his statements, which is love all and serve all. So the concept of spirituality, the concept of service are closely interrelated. What do we mean by spirituality? I'm going to present you now for just a few statements made by top leaders from around the world. These are taken from a book that my wife and I wrote some years ago called Leading with Wisdom, Spiritual-Based Leadership in Business. These are just some quotes from some of these top leaders from 30 companies in 15 countries throughout the world. I could go on quite some time with this, but I will not. This is just to give you a view as to how not philosophers, not religious people, but top business leaders refer to the concept of spirituality. Here's the reference. The book was, by the way, published also in India by Sage, as well as in several other parts of the world. The following is a very profound statement by the former leader of Medtronics. Medtronics is one of the world-leading companies in medical equipment, electronically based medical equipment. If I recall correctly, Medtronics was the company that developed the pacemaker. William George said then, we are all spiritual beings, composed of minds, bodies, and a spiritual side. To unleash the whole capability of the individual, mind, body, and spirit, gives enormous power to the organization. It truly empowers members of the organization to devote their entire beings to the ultimate purpose for which the organization exists, which is to serve others. Once again, the strong relationship between the concept of spirituality and the concept of service, and now the concept of leadership. In other words, the workplace is an arena for spiritual growth and service to others. I don't think that this kind of a concept is very prevalent in most companies throughout the world. the whole concept of the workplace as being an arena for spiritual growth and for service to others. I'll close with some important questions on the relationship between values, spirituality, and leadership. Where do the values come from in values-based leadership? I would venture to say that in almost all organizations, the values are developed by the top leadership, quite often together with the aid of some clever, intelligent consultants. It is seldom that the values that characterize a company and its values-based leadership are a true product of a spiritual interrogation as to who we are, what is important to us, and how well best we can serve those constituencies who are affected by our behavior. So whose values are they? What is the relationship between my personal values and corporate values? I made the point earlier that if you are really to engage your employees, and this of course applies particularly to those important employees who play a major role in the company, there must be a reasonable coherence between the individual sense of values and the corporation's values. Unfortunately, up until now, for most organizations, most companies, the focus has been not on true values, but on wealth. And that appeals to employees have been either by their salaries, their stock options, and the like, so that they could see that if they promoted the company in effectiveness in earning money, they too would become wealthy. There's a big difference between such a focus on monetary wealth and values. What is the source of responsibility in corporate social responsibility? Why is the company responsible? To whom is it responsible? Again, what I call important corporate existential questions. And then what is success? Success is a word used so often. You'll quite often hear someone referred to as he's highly successful as a businessman. What do they generally mean? They generally mean he's good at earning money. They don't mean he's good at serving others. Again, these are very different perspectives on what it is to be a leader. To be a leader from this perspective is to be spiritually oriented, to have values as a core concept in our understanding of identity, legitimacy, and success. In other words, are values, ethics, sustainability, and responsibility simply instruments? Is the business of business simply business? Or is it to love all and serve all? That is the end of my brief presentation. How do I shut this off, Sunita?
No, that's fine, sir. I was wondering if you can take a few questions from the participants who are attending.
Of course, and I apologize that you did not see my first slides. I
But
did.
you were speaking from your slides, so that was quite clear. Anyone who would like to ask any question to Professor Peter Pruzan? It's a rare opportunity. Please, you can unmute yourself and raise the question.
Could I
Yes,
see?
ma'am. I would like to ask one question.
Yeah, please, Tapan.
Yeah. Sir, actually, sir, I liked the slides and the lecture incredibly well, because it was very insightful and enlightening. Because we have studied it in the business schools also, that we have to integrate spirituality and the human dimension. But quite often we find that at the business level or the organizational level, these things, they are not integrated so well,
Yes.
like they are explained in the theory or in the organizational leadership or spirituality aspect. So what steps should the organizations must implement to in order to integrate spirituality and leadership together? uh, what suggestions would you like to give for the corporate people to incorporate in the organizations? That would be great.
Well, I think we're talking about a long-term process. I don't think that you can change a leader all of a sudden. The leader, it's good business to become values-based, to become spiritually. It has to come really from the heart. So we're not. And that's why this is a long-term process. It's only when more and more people develop the language, develop the personality, where they themselves are values-based, where they work not only with their head but also with their heart. Right? So this is not something. I don't think we can teach. I don't think you can have a course for top managers and tell them, hey, boys, times have changed. Now you've got to be values-based and spiritual, because then you're going to earn more money. That would be the typical consultant or business school way of doing it. It's not going to work. We're talking about, let me refer, there was an American troubadour called Bob Dylan. Some of you might have heard of him. He got the Nobel Prize in literature for his singing, for his poems. And he wrote a famous song called "The Answer is Blowing in the Wind." He was referring then to the fact that changes are taking place. They are taking place. I mentioned that Danish company, which is now amazing. They're a company I knew very well. I worked very closely with it for years in helping to develop a language of values and spirituality. Is now the most valuable company in Europe. This has taken many years. It is not due to spirituality or values. It's caused due to a brilliant company making great products, right? But the very fact that it has been able to make that tremendous progress, to have that so-called success, commemorates the fact that it has developed, it has been values-based. All of its leadership, all the people I knew speak in a different way than you would find in a typical American company.
Thank you, Professor Pruzan. There is Ravi Chinta. Sir, please.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Dr. Pruzan. Excellent presentation. Very thought-provoking set of questions. I feel a key word is conspicuously absent in your list of questions, which is the word is balance. We all recognize there are multiple value metrics, financial metrics, non-financial metrics, social impact metrics, and so forth. And in business schools, we really do teach how to take care of these multiple performance metrics. For example, a balanced scorecard or a triple bottom line, or the 3 Ps, planet, people, and profits, and so forth. We do teach that. I think you raise an excellent set of intellectually stimulating questions, but I think wise people like you should really address the idea of balance. We all recognize there's diversity in multiple value metrics because it's very evident in our own ontology. We first have to take care of ourselves. We have to survive before we can thrive. So, sometimes you have to sacrifice other value metrics just to survive, just to keep yourself alive. So I think wise people like you should really give some normative knowledge to us so that we can follow how to implement this notion of balance. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I
Good
take one more question from Mitra?
Before you do that, I just want to
Yeah,
make one.
sure.
Just this morning, I was rereading a small book I'd read many years ago by Tagore. And he refers in the book to his father, who he looked very much up to. And he said, I can't remember word for word, but he essentially said, my father was wonderful. He was in continual contact with God, but at the same time, he was living his life, working, being a family person and whatnot. Again, this whole notion of balance is totally is essential. And how to teach that, or how, that's another question. But your point is extremely well taken. Thank you.
Yeah, Madam Mitra,
Yeah,
I could not see your first name. Please
yeah, that's
go ahead.
my first name. Yeah. Professor Pruzan, this is I mean, I'm so honored and I'm humbled that I am able to hear you directly, because this paper of yours, Can Organizations Have Conscience, has been a guiding paper for us. Professor Nishigandha is here. So we are collaborating on a paper, and we are actually trying to study this aspect of organizational consciousness, and we are trying to imagine that there should be a category of organizations who could be labeled as conscious organizations, conscious about the various aspects. Now, there is one hitch whenever we discuss. What about an organization which has amazing people's practices, which has wonderful leadership, which really takes care of the people, but the product line of the company is probably what they say is, let's say, a cigarette manufacturing company, or maybe, a similar something. But the organization has amazing people's practice. Leadership is entirely value-based. What do we have to say about such organizations? Will we still say that they are conscious organizations?
I can tell you, thank you for your question. I've met exactly such an organization some years ago. I was contacted by one of the world's largest producers of cigarettes, British American Tobacco Corporation, probably the world's largest producers of cigarettes. They had a problem. They had provided a large amount of money for cancer research at a major university in Great Britain. The result was that the entire faculty in the medical department left that university. Right? As a reaction, they said, we don't want to have anything to do with a company that's producing cigarettes. And they contacted me to ask me, what should we do? I don't have the time to go through the details, but the question you raise is extremely important. You can make it to a producer of weapons.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Today, war is going on in Ukraine, right? Companies are producing bombs, weapons of all kinds, just terrible weapons, right?
Correct.
So this is really, so you can have a company, an organization that appears to be very well performing according to all the things we're talking about, nevertheless is making horrible products. The only choice that such a company has is to somehow work hard as possible to move into other fields, to develop its products in a way that they are less lethal. Less, for example, it may seem to be a paradox. How can you make a less lethal bomb?
Yeah.
Well, today you have bombs that can be totally destructive, or they can be pinpointed to what you want to destroy. Right? What they call I forget the term, there's certain bombs which explode into a large number of smaller bombs, killing a huge number of people, not just the enemy, but civilians. Right? The same with cigarettes. You are able to gradually get away from do research to remove the carcinogenic content of your cigarettes. I worked many years ago, well before it was known that cigarette smoking was dangerous. I was an advisor to the major Danish cigarette producing company. Right? It was a wonderful company. They had very happy employees. They were in all ways, and then it turns out that they were making a bad product. Right? What they had to do was to move gradually away to for example, what such companies have done throughout the world is to make people be hooked on smoking. You would, in these cigarettes that were being produced, they would put licorice and other elements which made it enjoyable, so that you didn't get irritated in your throat, that you found, and the nicotine then gradually made you hooked. They moved away. They removed all of these additives to their cigarettes, right? And made new. They're still a horrible company. They're still producing, but the cigarettes they produce are far less dangerous than they were earlier. The company of final comment, of course, the company can commit suicide. It can simply say, we're going to shut ourselves down. We realize that what we're doing is not ethical. It's affecting people in a bad way. That's not going to work. You could have the same question to all kinds of products. People throughout the world, for example, I'm vegetarian. Meat, particularly red meat, shown to be unhealthy for the world. But a huge portion of the population eats meat. Companies, I could continue. These are huge challenges. The answer is more as to how you make the production and how you prepare the consumer to move away from your product towards other better products. How to move away from the producer of red meat to come to vegetarian food, for example.
We have another hand raised, Dr. Ashish Pandey.
Oh, how wonderful, Ashish. Hello, Ashish.
So, Sairam, so wonderful to see you, sir. Can you share how you have identified, you have mentioned some qualities or attitude of leadership, work for the larger purpose, identify, discover the self, the deeper self within, and on the values. Can you suggest what has been the kind of sadhana, the spiritual practices? Have you observed in some of the leaders performing some spiritual practices, or what are the practices you have found to be followed by some leaders who have been the source of their transformation, or they have been support system for their transformation? Because lot of this is like internal journey, internal purification process.
First, thank you for the question, Ashish. First of all, I think that for this to really have an impact on the individual, that person somehow has to be open to it. Right? It may surprise him or her to find out that they have a spiritual orientation. They're so trained, they've become successful by performing according to what people expected from them. And people did not expect love all, serve all. People did not expect ethics on service. So most of the leaders who have gotten to a position of leadership have in fact done this by ignoring what promptings they may have within them to be spiritual, ethical, values-based. So I think that the great challenge is to, and everyone has this within us, I have no doubt whatsoever that we are all embodiments of love. I have no doubt whatsoever. This applies to Putin, this applies to everyone. Our problem, of course, is that it is buried deep within us. So I think that the great challenge is to somehow to get the individual leader to be aware of and to open the door to his or her own spirituality. How to do this? The best way is by being with other people who have opened themselves. Right? I have found that as a teacher for many years, I've been a professor for God knows how many years. I did not start out this way. I was a very, very traditional, totally rational, mathematically oriented teacher. I was so fortunate that gradually, over time, a number of experiences enabled me to realize that I was far more than a traditional teacher. Right? Promptings take place. You meet people. You read something. You hear a song, whatever it is. Right? And this isn't, I mentioned before the song by Bob Dylan, "The Answer, My Friend, is Blowing in the Wind." There are developments. The very fact that we're having such a meeting today, the very fact that such a dialogue is going on, this would not take place 20, 30, 40 years ago. Would not take place. You would not even find, when Chakraborty and I started our teamwork, it was a rare thing, right, to have such open discussions. One of the great things, so it's to be with people, to somehow who can open your heart to the loving person that you are. There are different ways of doing. One of the great things that Chakraborty did, he had in the Management Center for Human Values, there was a wonderful room, and there were paintings of 4 great Indian spiritual leaders on the wall. Being in such an atmosphere automatically lifted you, right? So the idea is somehow, by your very presence, I think this is what my role has been for the last many years of my life, has been to somehow to inspire particularly younger people to be aware of the fact that they are embodiments of love, and that they can find fulfillment in life by recognizing, embracing, accepting the fact that they simply are not just money machines, that they are people whose purpose in life is to love and serve. the final words I referred a moment ago to this book I'm just rereading by Tagore, who refers to his father. He said, my father, all of his life, was in contact with God, but at the same time, totally a citizen of society, to his family and to his surroundings. Get people to read Tagore. That's a possible answer.
Thank you very much, Professor Pruzan. It was so insightful, enlightening, and that everyone connected with the thought process. We need such thought processes to be flown across the globe. We are so very grateful for you to deliver this first S.K. Chakraborty Memorial Lecture. It's a quarterly virtual lecture series on human values and ethics in organizations. So we need your guidance and continued association. Thank you very much.
And I thank you, Sunita. It is wonderful to see you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's my honor. Thank you. So,
Thank you much.
so this memorial lecture is closed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor, I'll take the liberty to mail you. I have the email ID in this paper of yours, and I have been thinking of mailing you for quite some time, but now I will for sure. My name is Mitra.
It's an old paper, Mitra. It's an old paper.
I know. I'll share what we have been trying to work on, and we'll take your insights.
Thank you. Thank you. I would appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Namaskar.
Thank you so much.
Namaskar.
Thank you so much, sir.